about you in his magazine. So I think he was less of a promoter and more of a power, in a position of power.
Yeah, so fewer outlets in those days. So if somebody was interested in the subject, there's only a couple magazines that are going to be writing about it, and if he's the guy writing about it, he's the guy who tells the story for everybody else. He's the
back then he was the only magazine.
He was the creator of history.
Yeah.
And you were part of that history, which is pretty neat. I saw the truck on my last trip down. I stopped at Spectator and bought a water pump because I'd had a crazy issue with my FJ40. Had a fan blade that sheared off. I think it might have been the shop. Could have. I don't know. I don't even want to go into that. But anyways, I had a fan blade that sheared off, and I had to drive it for 15, 20 miles with this only 3 fan blades. And I thought, what damage did that do to the water pump? Do I want to be on a back road in Baja needing a water pump? That killed me on my very first La Carrera run, having a water pump. Needing to find a water pump in mainland Mexico for a 1966 Datsun, which was never imported to Mexico, was a pretty tall order. Thought for $100 I should stop at Spectre and get a water pump, which allowed me to actually put my hands on and see the truck that you won in. It's so delightful it's in that museum, and that people like me can actually go see it and see it in person. And so, I know that truck you're winning. You were in, I think, a Champion Spark Plugs ad.
Yeah,
that would have made all the big magazines. Where else did that go for you?
It didn't go anywhere. When
go anywhere.
When we won that thing, we thought, boy, this is the start. People are going to know us. We're going to get sponsored. This, that. But Toyota just wasn't interested at all outside of a verbal congratulations. And I really don't know why, because a few years later, when the Toyota pickup truck by
Ivan Stewart,
Ivan Stewart,
Ivan Stewart,
it got
mega, it became huge.
They had
huge.
mega bucks poured into that thing, and
so you were the pioneers.
Well, yeah, we were the first.
Thanks for your service. Now get out of here.
We were the first Toyota to win something in Baja.
Yeah, well, I don't think Toyota was winning anything previously.
Well, they were racing pickups a little bit.
Right.
Their mini pickup.
They had Carroll Shelby had the 2000 GTs that Pete Brock ended up beating them in the Datsun Roadsters, and then that was about the end of Toyota's racing. But you said they had the mini trucks, so I'm going to take your word for it.
There were some mini trucks beginning to be in Baja racing.
And I know that Pete Brock had the Datsun 510 down there that didn't go so well. He said he was throwing the shocks right through the front struts in '69 and the front struts right through the front fenders, and they had an airplane flying over from the factory that would land out in the middle of nowhere, throwing a new set of struts, but when it got dark, they couldn't land the plane, and that was the end of the Datsuns. They came back with mini trucks and did pretty well in subsequent years, but... So from the 15 years that you raced there, you started out in home-built single-seaters, and where was the progression?
Well, the progression really, it just went to... I built a couple of cars. The first 2 cars were complete my design, complete suspensions my design. And honestly, I didn't know enough about cars to be doing that.
Tell me a little bit about your ignorance. What chassis, what engine, where did you start?
Well, I completely, I built the frames, I built the transmissions, I built the engines, and I don't know nothing about Volkswagens, really. I've got a couple of friends in the around that have Volkswagen garages, and so I could get information, but they didn't know anything about racing Volkswagens. They just knew about. So I, and then my dad had a machine shop, and we had an arc welder, and that's where I learned how to put them. And I'd been into fun buggies, starting out with Renault Dauphines with the top cut off.
No one ever said that, ever. A Renault Dauphine with the top cut off.
Right.
So were those just around Southern California in those days? Could you buy them for $100 used because nobody could fix them?
$50. And, you couldn't afford a Volkswagen. That'd cost you $250, So,
how much did a Caravelle cost? A Renault Caravelle? Was that
Oh,
75?
probably, but there weren't many of those.
French cars, really. If you needed a bargain, you had to buy a French car. I
Yeah.
love it. Go ahead, Pete.
And-
Tell me more about starting with Dolphins.
Yeah, I learned how to
Off.
widen the rear wheels because you couldn't buy any of that stuff, especially for a Renault Dauphine. So then I got to widening rear wheels for Jeeps and building roll bars for a Jeep dealer up in Oceanside, California, which is where I live now. And that went on for a couple of years where I'd build 10 of each of those things every month for a while. So, and that's all while I'm learning how to weld. You know, it's not like I know what I'm doing.
And how old are you at this time?
26, 27, 28.
So back from the service, and
Did a little
you're
college.
working for Dad and living in a trailer behind Dad's shop.
Working for Dad, $2.50 an hour. But I wasn't worth any more than $2.50 an hour. You know, I was just beginning to learn to be a machinist. And we all decided to buy a welding machine because maybe we could draw a little bit of business off the road, welding some things up. And, you know, I just put out a sign, said I can weld. And all my chassis were welded together with stick welders and not MIG guns, like became very popular very quickly in that early 70s. And I built Baja bugs. I had a couple of doctors around town here that wanted to go racing in a Baja bug, so I built those for them. And it's funny, one of them didn't even know how to drive a stick shift. And the first day we took it out to test, that's when I learned he couldn't drive a stick shift. We took it out to Ocotillo Wells.
Makes perfect sense.
And he was able to get it running. You know, once you got a stick shift going, it's just getting it going is a problem. But he leaped it off of some hill about 6 feet in the air, and it came down on our front wheels and bent the tie rods. So we went home. But he became the better of the two drivers, and I was associated with those guys for 2 or 3 or maybe 4 years.
You started off single-seat VW-based racers that you constructed everything yourself. What was the progression? So you started there. You eventually got to the Land Cruiser, and then you got onto a Jeep. That's what I've heard. But fill us in on the spots that I haven't heard about.
Between the Toyota and the Jeep, my dad had died and left me $10,000, and so I put $10,000 into a 2-seat Chenoweth frame, and so that was probably happening about 74. And that was a suspension that I didn't build. That was Chenoweth rear end, Volkswagen styled, and Volkswagen front end, and that was a disaster. That we never won anything with that car. And after that, the Jeep happened in '78, and we got a 4th place in the Baja 1000. I think that's the only race that I raced with them. Bill may have taken it and raced one in L.A., but it didn't do very good. But it was, it was good for his magazine to write an article about what we'd done. And then I built a Carmen Ghia, which was a Baja bug for short course racing. And I hit everything about right with that thing. I mean, you get a little experience, you start learning some stuff. And that thing, it ran Saddleback Park and it ran the L.A. Coliseum. There were 2 of those races, and we won the Baja Bug class in the L.A. Coliseum against Rick or Roger. I think it was Rick Mears at L.A. Coliseum. And then I raced Roger out in Colorado with that. With the Carmen Ghia. It was known as the Carmen Gorilla.
The Carmen Gorilla. I'm going to have to look that up on the internet. So you've dropped some big names here, Lynn Chenoweth and the Mears brothers. And tell me about, did you have any relationship with Lynn?
No. In fact, I have met him once or twice, but he wasn't active in his business down there anymore. In fact, it may have been sold to the guy who took over. I think it Johnson took it over at that time. And Lynn was a great off-road mine.
I just saw him at the inaugural Nora Mexican 500, and I thought, wow, that's Lynn Chenoweth. I haven't seen him since 1986 when I photographed the Baja 500. And he's looking good. He's got some white hair, but, you know, I'm delighted that Nora has come about and all these old vehicles are, you know, making their way. They're still seeing the light of day. You get to see some neat stuff out now.
Nora's doing some great stuff. And it was a shame that the Mexicans took the race away from Nora when they did, because it was a total disaster. We raced, in fact, that was the race when the Mexicans were running it, that we raced the Toyota in and won, because we didn't get paid any prize money because the Mexican went broke. And to their own credit, there was a race over in Parker, Arizona the same weekend, which was in retaliation for them doing it. And that Parker, Arizona race took about half the competitors, so, you know, the Mexicans didn't get but about half the revenue to run their race on, and their expenses were relatively the same as they would have been. You know, the first half of your entries are probably to pay expenses, and then you make some money off the second half. But Mickey Thompson eventually took off over the Baja races because the Mexicans went broke. Nobody was going to race with them again. And Mickey Thompson had to pay us all off the prize money. That was stipulated by the Mexicans. So we eventually did get our money, which was about $1,800, I think. And about half of that was a sponsorship from the fastest Toyota had contingency money. And the total prize money was like $900.
And did Bill send all that over to you in unmarked bills, or did he get to go out and wine and dine on that? And you
No, we split it.
Oh, terrific! Terrific.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that I spent that much money.
Well, triple shocks. What other things did you engineer on that 73 FJ40 that won the Baja? What did you bring to the party?
The shocks was what I brought to the parties, and then just nutting and bolting stuff on right, putting the lights on it. The roll bar had been built by Schmitty built up in Los Angeles. It was a donation from. So I had a good half of that month that I had to prepare that thing was towing that Toyota around to the various places to get a roll bar put in it, to get the seats put in it. Mastercraft supplied the seats, and so it was. I mean, I was like a crew chief, a working crew chief, because you know it definitely needed shock absorbers, and those are really the toughest thing to put on. That requires strong welding.
Yeah, you had to fab up mounts for for two more. So did you have one in the stock location, then two more addition, or how did you work that out?
One in the stock and one in front and one behind the axle on each side in the front. And then the rear, I think we just had two shocks on each side.
Well, we're going to pivot here because we probably just lost all of our audience talking about the arcane details on FJ40s, which I love. And we're going to get back to your dad, got out of Ohio somehow and got to California and started going to Baja when you were quite young in an old Dodge pickup, if I recall our previous conversation. Can you tell me about how that came about, when you first started going to Baja, and what you saw and what it was like?
Well, I grew up in Ohio, rural Ohio, and we had a blizzard one year that froze my dad out. He said, "To hell with this." And he'd come from Cleveland, where there was plenty of bad weather, but when he had to take care of it himself, he said, "No more of this." He started taking a California newspaper, and he couldn't believe it was 70 degrees in the winter in San Diego, so that's where we came. By 1953, and I was 12 when I got to California. So he got a job at one of the aircraft plants. And it took him a couple of years to get his financial situation to where he could he bought an old 1948 Jeep